This is literally exactly how I would do it. No sponsored lists or hidden agendas on this one. If I was personally building a $1,000 gaming PC that would sit on my desk and I would have to use it every single day, this is exactly how I would do it. And also in today's video, we're of course going to be going over some real in-depth benchmarks so you can see the exact performance of this PC in a ton of different games. And I'm also going to be including a ton of alternative options for you to use if you're thinking about copying this as a build guide. I know my more hardcore audience probably doesn't understand this concept, but there's a lot of brand new PC gamers looking to build their very first PC, and they use these videos as templates for their own builds. It sucks when they're watching a build guide video like this and like the fifth part is out of stock and they don't know how to replace it and find something else. I'm going to try to tackle that today because I'm including a ton of extra options that you can go with if something isn't in stock, and I'm also including options if you wanted to change things up for more performance compared to aesthetics, or if you just prefer different manufacturers. What I'm trying to say is that I 100% got you covered, so let's jump into this parts list after a quick word from today's sponsor. Big thanks to Deepcool and specifically their new LS520 all-in-one liquid cooler for sponsoring today's video. Deepcool massively stepped up their game with this new AIO, and this new LS series is packing a ton of new features such as their new 4th gen pump, a super easy daisy chain system for both the power and RGB, and there's some serious customization features on this as well. Instead of the much more expensive LCD screen option, Deepcool is giving you an extra logo plate so you can design it exactly how you want. And then the new infinity mirror pump face design behind it projects 2 light loops for a really neat visual effect. You can then swap these plates out to whatever you want, but even with just the basic look, this is seriously an aesthetically pleasing cooler, and coming from Deepcool, you know it performs great as well. I recently built a PC on my Thirsty Thursday live stream with the LS520, and it's keeping the temperatures of our Ryzen 5 CPU very chilly, and it can handle much hotter CPUs as well. Learn more and grab one for yourself by using that link down in the description. So I do want to mention real quickly before diving into that parts list that the one single disclaimer for this build is literally what the title of the video says. This is exactly how I, like Zach, the aesthetic god, would build a $1,000 PC. So you know we aren't getting the absolute most dialed in price to performance here. Hopefully that's very clear to all of you. I think we're good. So starting with the CPU, this here is the Intel i5-12400F, and honestly there's just no CPU that can even match this over on the AMD side right now. This is a perfect CPU for around the $150 to $170 mark, and it would just absolutely smoke CPUs like the 5600 and 5600X in terms of value for gaming. If you were going for a fully priced performance system with zero aesthetics in mind, you could actually squeeze in the more expensive 12600K upgrade, but this is a prime example of how I would personally do it, aesthetics over everything, and the 12400F is still a beastly chip. Now for the motherboard it's plugged into, I do have to admit that I wanted to use a motherboard that I already had in the studio, but don't worry, I'll give you some alternatives to use as well. This here is the MSI Mag B660M Mortar Wi-Fi, and I still have this on our shelf because MSI sent me 2 motherboards for a single project a couple of months ago, and this was the extra one. Now don't get me wrong, this is a great motherboard that does include Wi-Fi, which is clutch for a lot of people, and even the aesthetics are on point for a build today, but if I were building from scratch, I'd still probably get a slightly cheaper option. If you want to save a ton of money, then I'd probably get something like the MSI Pro B660M-G DDR4 because that one's only $90, and if you're okay with the all black color scheme, which would still look good in this build today, that would be a great option. And for aesthetics, the ASRock B660M Steel Legend is always a great pick, and that one's only $115, which is still much cheaper than the mortar we're using today. Now next up we have the RAM, and you just can't go wrong with this YOLO 2x8GB kit that's clocked at 3000 megahertz for only $48. This kit is almost always on sale and looks super clean for all white builds like this one, but if you do want to go RGB, there's obviously a couple options to go with. If you're willing to spend a few extra dollars, I really like the newer white Glowways RGB kit that's usually around $67. The aesthetics of this kit are tier S for the price, and I recently used this in the Jawa giveaway PC that I built a couple of weeks ago on my Thirsty Thursday live stream. Follow me over on twitch.tv/ZachTechTurf, by the way, if you aren't already. Moving on to the SSD, this is just what I already had, but definitely still recommend as an option. With our MSI Mortar motherboard, we do have the M.2 shield, so we can get away with using these ugly blue WD-SN570s, and I bought a bunch of these for $43, which is a solid price for being a budget NVMe Gen 3 drive. There are some other budget options options for you to use if you find them even cheaper. The Team MP33 is always a hit in our PC flipping community, ZachTechDrift.com/Discord by the way, and also the Patriot P310 goes on sale quite often as well for sometimes cheaper than $40. If you do want to spend a little more money on the storage, you obviously could upgrade to a 1TB drive, and I definitely recommend you do that if you need the space, but you could always go for a faster and higher rated drive as well with something like the WD Black SN770. And next up we get to the power supply, and if you've been watching my videos for a while, then I'm 100% certain that you're tired of hearing about it, but once again, and probably for the last time, this is the EVGA 750 GT. The reason why I've used this so many times in the last 2 months is because I bought like 10 of them from EVGA B stock for just $40, and that's some unreal value for a tier B unit. And for me personally, after buying B stock so many times without having any issues, I probably would actually go down this route for a fresh build of mine because it allows me to spend more of that extra money on more performance or more aesthetics, obviously. Now, there is indeed a bit more of a risk when buying a used power supply compared to new, which I'm sure you're all aware of. So if you don't want to go used, then I would pick up something like the Asus TUF 550, which usually sits around less than $45, and it's also a tier B model with a beautiful sticker pack to go along with it. For a $1,000 system like this, I wouldn't recommend going any lower than tier B. Power supplies like the Thermaltake BM2 550 watt are indeed great value at its new standard price of $40, but for a build that's this expensive with components like our CPU and GPU in there, I really would prefer sticking to tier A or tier B. Moving on, next up we get to the case, and honestly this one, along with the rest of the lineup from Fractal Design, could quite possibly be my favorite case on the market right now. This one specifically is the Pop Air Mini RGB, and I love so many things about this case. Now first up, it is a bit more on the expensive end, and you gotta remember that I operate under the aesthetics over everything mindset. You absolutely could get a much cheaper case in here and have more money on a better CPU, GPU, or SSD, but again, this is how I would personally do it. I love how it comes with 3 pre-installed RGB fans, which can be daisy chained into other 3-pin ARGB products like we did with the CPU cooler. I'm absolutely in love with the little front drawer, which is great for things like SD card readers, USB-C hubs, and thumb drives, and I'm almost in love with the form factor of the case. The only thing I don't really like about it is all the extra room up here at the front, and in my opinion, like 95% of builders aren't even going to take advantage of this space. I love that the case sits low to the ground, it's got that signature Fractal Design compact design to it, the PSU shroud looks incredible, but I just think the length of the case is a bit too long. And if you do want to go with a budget alternative, I would recommend the Iceberg Z1, which I used in Flippin' Friday episode number 20, barring you're okay with the slight mismatch of case fan colors, and the DIY PC S08, which I featured in episode 21, is great for the budget price as well. And before we get to our graphics card selection, I did add in 2 parts specifically for aesthetics, the first one being Asia Horse cable extensions, and these only cost $21, so honestly, I wouldn't really recommend an alternative. There's certainly a bunch of other options that you can go with, but since Asia Horse is still the GOAT, I would just go with these. And for the other aesthetic part, I added the Deepcool AG400, which they kindly sent out to me, but honestly, the 12400F doesn't even really need this. You could use the stock Intel cooler, which looks pretty neat if you pair it with the right colored components, but this AG400 looks stunning inside our build today. Now, don't get me wrong, the AG400 will certainly keep our 12400F very cool, and you'll see the temperatures later on in the video, but this is honestly just an aesthetic play, and I think it looks great tied into our Fractal Design fans as well. And just as a note, the ID Cooling SE224XT and Vitro V5 are also great budget options as well, but you will probably want more cooling if you upgrade to a 12600K or higher. And finally, to stop the madness of waiting to see what the graphics card is, this one actually probably isn't a huge surprise to my more experienced PC building audience, because for all white builds like this, there's really no other options to go with that are this good for the price. This is the Power Color Hellhound Spectra White RX 6650 XT, and it's pretty ridiculous to see this high end of a GPU squeezed into a $1,000 all white build. Now again, if you aren't worried about aesthetics, then you could absolutely squeeze in even more performance with the 6700 XT, because the prices of those are just so good right now. But for our build, we of course had to pay that extra white color tax, but the 6650 XT is still a beast regardless. This is a monster of a 1440p graphics card, which we'll see in the benchmarks here very soon, and this Hellhound lineup is just the best right now in terms of value, and they really can't be beat for all white builds. If you did want to use NVIDIA, then a lot of people are still using the RTX 3060 Vision, which does look great, but for the same price of around $420, that card gets completely smoked by the 6650 XT, so I couldn't possibly recommend it, but the option is indeed available. With that being said, here's what the full parts list is looking like, and as you can see, our total comes out to just a touch over a $1,000 mark, and this is a beautiful build. Now that we're looking at the completed build as a whole though, I do indeed feel inclined to quickly mention that we again ran into the extremely frustrating problem of building white builds, and that's the fact that the shades of white aren't the same across individual components. The Deepcool AG400 is slightly more yellow compared to our graphics card, case, and RAM, and it's so annoying every time this happens. I'm not sure how much you can see this on camera, but in real life, you can definitely see the difference. If you haven't used the specific components before, it's really tough to anticipate this because it's not like the product pages show you the different shades of white if they're yellow or not, so be on the lookout for this, and my alternative recommendations of the Vitro V5 and ID Cooling SE224XT may be better options for you. But with that aside, I do want to hop into these benchmarks, but real quickly before we do that, I just wanted to give you guys a very quick life update, because if you're still watching this video at this point, then you're a true baller. If you watched my single dab video on my ZTT Extras channel, where I post a ton of content by the way, then you'll know that I'm going through a really challenging 6 months with my wife being away for a work trip and me watching one of my boys all by myself. So I just wanted to apologize here on the main channel for our video upload schedule being all over the place. Taking care of a 3-year-old and sometimes my 1-year-old as well completely by myself has been a humongous challenge. We're staying strong though, but unfortunately the video schedule has taken a little bit of a hit, but I'm trying my best out here. But yeah, let's get into these benchmarks finally. And during the testing, make sure you keep an eye on the upper left-hand corner to see both the utilization percentages as well as the cooling temperatures, because we do test our builds how a normal gamer would run their system with the side panel installed and all that. So for our first game, we're starting with an easy one, which is Valorant, and here we could just put the settings at 1080p and high and got a very overkill 288 FPS. Speaking of overkill, we tested Apex Legends, and with 1080p and very high settings, which granted most people probably aren't playing a competitive game at, here we got 213 FPS. Elden Ring followed up after that, and in 1080p, we could actually push the settings all the way up to max, and we still managed to average exactly right on that stupid FPS cap of 60. Next up, we have Grand Theft Auto 5, and in 1080p with very high settings, we still got over our 144 FPS target mark with 156. Halo Infinite was up next, and in 1080p with very high settings, we got 104. We also ran Lost Ark at the same 1080p and very high settings and got 168. And getting towards the end here, we have Call of Duty Vanguard. Actually, while we're here, please let me know if you guys want to see a dedicated Modern Warfare 2 benchmarking video. Really thinking about testing that one with budget graphics cards like I sometimes do. But yeah, here in 1080p with ultra settings, we got 124 FPS. After that, we tested Minecraft, and honestly, we probably should have added some mods or texture packs or something to this benchmark, because in 1080p and fancy settings, we got close to 1000 FPS, which is just obnoxious. And for the last gaming title, we saved Fortnite for last, and with 1080p and pro settings, we got 234 FPS. And finally, we of course ran some 3D Mark Time Spy action, and this $1,000 white and aesthetic AF build knocked out a score close to 10K at 9,858, which you'll love to see. And just in case you wanted to see some more titles that confirm we probably should have tested this build in 1440p, here are the results for 10 more games. But now I want to hear from you guys. How would you personally design a $1,000 gaming PC like literally today, or how would you change mine? And if you are on a little bit tighter of a budget and you want to see a build guide that's a little bit cheaper than this one, then feel free to click the video that's on the screen now.